Hey y'all, Alex from Music Hub here, and today this is going to be a bit of a different type of video that we're going to do. So I sort of made it clear in the channel name and then also in the introduction video that I did that this channel is going to become a lot more music focused than it currently is. I mean, right now there's not much apart from just the music books that I've reviewed so far. And this is kind of my way of starting the ball rolling towards that, to start to get to that point. I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit of background as far as my own experience with music. And I wanted to do this kind of in a more informal setting because these aren't reviews that I'm going to be doing. These are going to be just me talking about my relationship with these particular musical works and kind of how they've influenced me, how they've sort of started me out on my journey to get to where I am right now in the projects that I'm working on. So we're doing this unscripted, probably mostly unedited, though I imagine there will be some edits kind of here and there. I wanted to talk about 12 musical works. And initially it was going to be 10, but I came up with two more, so we're going to do 12. 12 musical works that really shaped me throughout my life, in the sense of helping me understand music better, helping me connect with music on a deeper level, and then just like personal connection, favorites of mine, and then things that really impacted this project specifically. Things that sort of steered me towards the direction of, hey, let's try to write and review the entire history of recorded music. So, yeah, so that's what we're going to do. I've got 12 items that we're going to talk about. So let's go ahead and hop right on in. Also, I am getting over a cold currently, so apologies if I don't sound great. I was able to pull it together for the videos that I recorded yesterday, the Trail of Tears and the Difference Engine videos, but we'll see how it goes for a longer video today. There's an airplane flying over our heads currently in my house, which is very fitting because the first musical work that we're going to talk about is the Beatles' White Album. To kind of backtrack for a second, I'm talking in terms of musical works. I'm not talking exclusively albums. I'm not talking exclusively classical pieces. This can be albums, classical pieces, individual songs. I have a few of those. Really anything that is kind of its own standalone musical piece. One thing that I'm trying to do in this project is kind of get away from focusing too much on albums as the sort of the main kind of movers as far as the history of recorded music. I think that's a little bit narrow-minded and only kind of like that kind of limits you to the rock music era. So we're trying to kind of talk about anything that qualifies as a piece, a work of music. So that's what we're doing here. That said, first thing I'm going to talk about is an album. The Beatles obviously have a place on this list because they are the band that I first fell in love with when I was young. I think I was about 8 or so when I started really listening to them and getting into them. And the White Album, I picked this one. I could have picked Abbey Road, and I almost did. But the White Album to me served as an enormous musical education because of the sheer volume of it and the sheer disparity kind of different genres that the four Beatles kind of explore throughout the entire 90-minute runtime. So it definitely, there's something to be said about how it utilizes utilizes album flow, how it sequences the songs. I think side 2, for instance, I mean, the side 2 has so many of these little kind of ditties that in a lot of Beatles albums, if you threw it in the middle somewhere, they'd be considered slight. and maybe among the weaker stuff, but side 2 feels like it's almost entirely these slighter songs. I know I'm including Blackbird in that, but still, it's all these kind of more trivial quote unquote numbers, and but because they're all kind of stuck together in that way, they sort of like the transitions between them, there's not as much of a difference between, oh, this one is like super heavily produced, whereas this one is more sparse. It's all kind of sparse or quirky in the case of like Piggies. And so I think it's really interesting how they design that. And yeah, again, just the different genres and styles. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that as an 8-year-old I was enjoying or trying to really understand Revolution 9 or, that idea of musique concrète. But, it was still interesting to be exposed to that side of things. And even if I kind of slagged it off at the time, it, I think, opened my mind to it down the road when I was willing to approach it again and approach that genre again. So there's just a whole lot to be said about the White Album. Books have been written about it, so I'm not going to add too much more, but the White Album was an enormous part of my musical development. And then again, the Giles Martin remix in 2018, when I heard that, it was like listening to the album for the first time again. So many little things that he brings out in the remix that I thought were just really cool. So the White Album is my first one in this list. Number 2, I'm going to go with a song. In this case, I'm going to go with the Gordon Lightfoot song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, released in 1976 off of his album Summertime Dream. The Summertime Dream album is strong. I wouldn't say it's one of his stronger albums, maybe top half, but it's really about that song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I was exposed to it from a young age because my dad really liked the song, and that one always, I think more so than other kind of acoustic storytelling songs, that one spoke to me because there is kind of a local connection. The Edmund Fitzgerald left from Superior, Wisconsin, which is only about 2 hours away from where I live. And my family frequented Duluth, Minnesota pretty frequently. So there's definitely a big connection there. And we listened to it a lot. And the story behind it, the story of the ship, really connected with me. And I think as a kid, that helped me understand how good storytelling is done in song form. And I love it. I didn't know this until a lot more recently, that it was a one-take performance. I think that's incredible, and that they did the whole thing in one take. And yeah, it's a very evocative song with a lot of beautiful imagery. Lightfoot is a national treasure. I got to see him, or an international treasure, I guess, because he's Canadian. I got to see him live in 2019, I believe, and it was a really great experience. So, in any case, it's a song that has personal meaning to me, but I think it also really did show me how songwriters are able to tell stories and how evocative songwriting can be when done well. And that was incredibly informative for me. And I still use that song as a benchmark. It's right up there with like Dylan's best and all the best kind of stereotypical guitar-based songwriters and songwriters in general. It's a landmark achievement, so I love it. Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is my second pick. My third one on the list, I had to go with a sort of a pop song, something that really made an impact on me early on in my life, and there were a few choices I could have picked from. I think the first pop song that I really knew was probably One Republic's Apologize, which came out, what would that have been, 2005? ish, 2004. But the one I'm choosing here is actually Lady Gaga's Bad Romance, released in 2009 off of the Fame Monster EP. I was, because of my kind of educational experience, I was not in an environment where pop music played a whole lot, so I was not open minded to it. And because I was raised on older stuff, I became one of those people who was like, no good music was made after 1985 or whatever bullshit. So when I would hear pop music, my general reaction was to bash it. And that was something that took a lot of time to reverse, and I'm obviously happy that I've done it. But Bad Romance is an early example of a song where, as much as I would run my mouth, say that I didn't like Lady Gaga and I didn't like any of this stuff, in my heart of hearts, I knew that I loved it. And, you listen to it now, and it's just such a well-crafted example of pop music in its most kind of brash form. And yeah, there's hooks all over that song. And Gaga's singing is obviously really strong. So something about it clearly clicked with me even back in that 2009-2010 framework, even if I wasn't going to admit it to myself. And there's value in that because, again, that's a foundation. That's a foundation that I could build off of to eventually get to the point where I'm like, no, excuse me. No, not all pop music is shit. In fact, a lot of pop music is pretty incredible. So, yeah, credit to this song for laying the seeds. And it's not the only one. There's a couple of others. Like, I did really like Apologize, actually, back in the day. Still have a soft spot for it. And then Kanye West's Stronger is another one that I thought about including. But Bad Romance, yeah, I mean, it's a perfect pop song. And yeah, it I think slowly began the process of opening my eyes to all of this. And I'll circle back just because, I mean, one of the big things that I talk about in a couple of these items is just enhancing that idea of open-mindedness. That's the whole point of all this. That's been the whole point of my musical evolution to this point, and it's the whole point of me doing this project. It's open-mindedness, understanding that every piece of art has some level of intrinsic value, whatever level that might be, and trying to appreciate that and to hone in on that. And even if that means kind of confronting my own biases sometimes. So this is a good example of me, I think, trying to challenge myself early on. And yeah, and I think I'm all the better for it. So Bad Romance, my third selection. My fourth pick is going to be probably the most kind of fuck obvious selection out of all of this. It's Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, released 1975 off of the A Night at the Opera album. Every kid who listens to Bohemian Rhapsody, or I shouldn't say that, most kids who listen to Bohemian Rhapsody will probably go through an obsession phase of it, at least if they're a music junkie. And I was no different. I think where my obsession differed from the average person was that I went hard into trying to analyze the song. So this would have been when I was about 14 or 15, I think. So, I mean, I'd known of the song before that, but around that time, I was trying to experiment a little bit with, like, arranging and composing and transcribing stuff like that. I had, like, a MuseScore 2 on my computer, the notation software. And so with Bohemian Rhapsody, I was like, I really want to figure out, like, the harmonies, like, all the harmonies for that. And so what I did, the original 24 track, the 24 tracks are all individually available on they were on YouTube. I think they still are. They were all available on YouTube. So I listened to the 24 tracks, just kind of each one start to finish, and tried to pick out the individual harmony parts as best as I could from those, and I transcribed them into MuseScore. And it came out really well, given that I didn't really have a lick of music theory knowledge at that time. So I actually wanted to do a cover of it with some people, but that never manifested itself, which is fine. But I think this was really the start of me trying to analyze music in a very in-depth way. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole song and dance for every song I listen to, but it really it gave me a reason to laser focus into kind of the specifics of the song, the nitty-gritty bits of the vocals and stuff like that, and being able to kind of pick out those individual harmonies and figuring those out just with repeated listenings, it helped me develop a better ear. And I think that is a valuable thing as well when you're evaluating music. So otherwise, yeah, nothing really more needs to be said. Bohemian Rhapsody is an incredible song. And for as overplayed as it might be on rock radio, I still love it. So that's my number 4. I should say also that I'm talking about these kind of in order of when I discovered them or when I connected with them. So if you're wondering why I'm jumping between 70s, 2000s, and about to be the 1990s, that would be why. All right. Number 5. This is probably the most obscure release out of anything that I'm talking about here, and that is the Acappella Company's Acappella Spirituals from 1993. Very brief background. The Acappella Company is the brainchild of a man named Keith Lancaster. Lancaster formed the Christian a cappella band Acappella in the early to mid 1980s. And a cappella are very successful, kind of in the southern United States. They've also had some kind of international success as well, and they've released a ton of albums. And Lancaster sort of ended up turning this into not necessarily transforming the a cappella group, but building off of it, creating other bands such as the AVB, the Acapella Vocal Band, GLAD, the Vocal Union, a couple of other kind of branch off groups, and fitting all of these different a cappella groups into this overall kind of framework called the Acappella Company. So it's become this kind of huge thing, or at least it was back in the 1990s. I mean, there are so many a cappella company releases throughout that time. I think it's tailored off a bit since then. But the a cappella company, in addition to kind of overseeing these different individual groups, they also kind of released albums under their own name, which were kind of just combinations of various members from these groups getting together and singing these traditional songs. So you had like a cappella gospel, singing like really traditional gospel numbers, a cappella classical, singing more kind of classical or hymnal based things, stuff like that. And a cappella spirituals falls into that category. So why did I pick it? Again, like Bohemian Rhapsody, I've always had this kind of fascination with the human voice and what it could do. And whereas Bohemian Rhapsody was kind of me really getting into the nuts and bolts of like a studio created thing, Acapella Spirituals is more just kind of me sitting back and just taking it all in. Like I'm just in awe at what these people can do. Spirituals, again, has kind of a bunch of different people in it. Like the main ensemble members are Weyburn Dean, George Pendergrass, Robert Guy, people like that. And their whole bit is to sing these traditional spirituals, and Acappella is not an all black ensemble, but in this case, it is all black members who are singing. And they come together and they're not singing these spirituals in the way that they would be like traditionally sung in the plantations. These are very contemporary inspired arrangements of these songs, kind of taking like basically incorporating influences from what gospel ended up evolving into in the early 1990s. And gospel obviously was taking influences from soul and a bit of funk and things like that. So you have all these influences kind of coalescing into this album. But again, it's a cappella, so it's all done by the human voice. It's all singers, some beatboxing in there. And it's stunning. It's stunning. It floors me every time. So I can't recommend it highly enough if you've never heard of it. And yeah, again, this was I include this here mainly because this is to me kind of the among the apexes of what the human voice can do. And again, recreating these spirituals with this kind of modern flavor, I think, is a really interesting idea. So, really wanted to kind of give it its acknowledgement. And also, I mean, this is kind of here just representing a cappella music in general. I definitely had a phase where I was really into that. So, gospel a cappella music, but then also contemporary stuff like pentatonics too. It's all really interesting to me. So this kind of represents all that, but I do think that a cappella spirituals is the apex of everything. So that is my fifth choice. My sixth choice is going to be my classical pick. And I'm going to go with Mahler's Symphony No. 3 in D minor, specifically the first movement, composed in 1896. There's quite a few classical pieces I could have put here, because I definitely heard a lot of it when I was growing up. Franz Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, all sorts of Beethoven works. There's a lot of things I could have put here. The reason why I put Mahler's Symphony No. 3, which isn't even one of my favorite Mahler symphonies necessarily, is because this was one that I got to play, that I got to perform. My musical background was in percussion and drums. I picked up percussion in kind of the symphonic band sense when I was 12. So I didn't start on like a drum set learning rock stuff. I was kind of, classically trained, as it were. And so I got to play in symphonic bands for a while, and then also in orchestra. And the last orchestra concert that I was a part of, in this kind of youth orchestra program that I was in, I was brought on to their like top ensemble, to assist with their performance of Mahler's Third Symphony. Again, they only did the first movement because the first movement alone took about 35 minutes to perform. The whole symphony, I think, is like 90, has like an 90 minute runtime or something ridiculous. So they only did the first movement, but it was such an incredible thing to be a part of. I was the triangle player, which is laughable in a sense, but if you've tried to play the triangle part for Mahler's Third Symphony, you'll know that it is one of the most difficult triangle parts out there. You actually need two beaters in order to be able to do it, because you've got kind of a 16th note triplet, like da 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 da, that type of figure. And yeah, it was just a blast. It was an incredible thing, and it's probably the best musical ensemble that I've ever performed with, from a talent standpoint. So I picked it because, again, that element of performance and being able to perform music that I've heard, This was kind of the apex of that. This was like, oh man, it doesn't get any better than this. Or if it does, then I just haven't experienced it yet. So it was an incredible thing. It was an incredible thing to be a part of. And yeah, and the fact that I have some performance background, I think, is also important context for this whole project, because there's a lot of people who write about music who don't have a performance background, and I don't intend to dismiss those people and those opinions. That said, I do think it is nice when there is more of that kind of background to build off of, because that is a more kind of unique perspective. You can get some more kind of interesting takes, I think, sometimes. So, yeah, Mahler's Third Symphony, Movement 1, is my sixth choice. Honorable mention, by the way, Ottorino Respighi's Pini di Roma, The Pines of Rome from 1924. That was another one where it was just an absolutely euphoric thing to be able to play. I played a bunch of different instruments. If you've ever played in the percussion section for Pines of Rome, you'll know that there's, like, unless you have about 10 or 12 different percussionists, you're going to need to kind of rotate people and have people play multiple different instruments, because there's a lot going on. So I played something like 4 or 5 different instruments in that performance. And then in the final movement, which is like the huge kind of build up from this really soft start into this just cacophonous finish, I got to play the tam tam, the gong, as it were. And yeah, it was incredible. So shout out to that piece as well. Okay, halfway home. The next 3 albums, I think it's actually all albums from here on out. The next 3 all came out within about a year and a half of each other. 2015, 2016, 2017, that period is incredibly formative for me, as far as my just kind of introduction into having the pulse of the music industry. I was aware of some new releases that were coming out. I would buy some new albums, but usually from like people who I had an established relationship with already, like the Beach Boys, That's Why God Made the Radio, Paul McCartney's new album from 2013, that type of thing. So I didn't have as much of a pulse on like new stuff that was coming out. But this first one that I'm going to talk about, this is going to be a left field choice. I have Death Grips, The Powers That Be Volume 2, Jenny Death from 2015. People are probably going to ask, why the fuck did you pick that? Out of all albums, out of all Death Grips albums, right? The most kind of experimental hip-hop act, one of the most popular experimental hip-hop acts that's ever existed, one of the most groundbreaking hip-hop acts ever, potentially. Out of all their albums, why would you pick Jenny Death? It's not their best by any means. I mean, I think if Jenny Death were isolated, it's probably like, at best, like 4th or 5th on my Death Grips rankings. But I pick it plain and simple just because it's the first hip-hop album that I ever heard. Now, why did I choose that one? Because this was around the time when I was starting to watch Anthony Fantano's videos on the Needle Drop channel. Fantano is someone who, at the end of the day, I think I have a ton of respect for. Obviously, I don't agree with every opinion he's ever had, by any means. And I don't like watch every video that he releases, but Fantano is a trailblazer for sure, and I'm sure you see some of his style in the book reviews that I've done. It's hard to escape Fantano's influence as a reviewer on the YouTube platform, and certainly when you're doing music reviews. So shout out to Fantano for everything that he's done. I think absolutely a positive influence on music criticism and music discourse, regardless of what some people might have you believe. But yeah, so Fantano obviously is a huge Death Grips stan, and at this time, I was just kind of, getting a sense of like how much other music there was out there that had no idea about, because I was watching his channel. So I was like, okay, let me pick just kind of bits and pieces, little things from these, his reviews and from what other people had recommended to me. So I can't remember. I definitely listened to like Arcade Fire's Funeral around this time. Bon Iver's For Emma Forever Ago around this time. Which I don't remember. I didn't get into it at that point, but now it's among my favorite albums ever. There were a couple of others that I can't remember, but this Death Grips album was one of them. Beach House Bloom. That was another one I listened to. But yeah, so I listened to this album, and after listening to Jenny Death, I just remember being kind of, what the fuck did I just listen to? Not even after listening to it, but like the first song, I Break Mirrors with My Face in the United States. Like it left an impression on me. So I give this album credit for two things. Number one, just for exposing me to more kind of experimental music in general, and just being like, okay, this is what this is like. Cool. Awesome. At least I have some framework for that going forward. And then number two, because it was the first hip-hop album I ever heard. Again, like contemporary pop music, I was dismissive of hip-hop for a long time. And it's kind of funny now that this was my first step into the genre, where I could have done something very easy, like Kanye or something, or even Kendrick. I think it would be. I don't think I heard Kendrick until a little bit after, until a little bit later. But yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it's a very important album for me, even if it's not by any means one of my favorite hip hop or Death Grips albums. So big impact on my musical development, which is why we're talking about it. Next up, again from this kind of formative time period, I have David Bowie's Blackstar. Blackstar was the first David Bowie album that I heard all the way through. I'd heard individual songs before it, but Bowie was one of those artists that I hadn't gotten around to exploring. That said, when I heard of his passing, which I remember very vividly, Monday morning, getting up, going down to my laptop computer, and that was literally the first thing I read on the news. After that, I watched the music video for Lazarus, and was, again, blown away by the foreshadowing of it all. And I think it was the next day, or sometime later that week, was when I actually listened to Blackstar for the first time. And yeah, it floored me. And I give Blackstar a lot of credit because this was the turning point between me exposing myself to more kind of experimental music. Again, obviously Blackstar is not in the same league as like Jenny Death or something in terms of experimentation, but it's still out there compared to most other stuff I'd heard at the time. Not only did it give me that exposure, but I also enjoyed it. And that kind of turning point, being like, oh wow, I connected with this really strongly, was paramount, I think, in kind of opening my eyes to a bunch of other genres. Like, again, hip hop, Bowie took influence from Death Grips, Kendrick Lamar when recording this, as well as to jazz and to free jazz. My jazz exposure to that point was Vince Guaraldi, for God's sakes, in the Charlie Brown Christmas soundtrack. Sorry, I'm rubbing my eyes. Again, it's the cold. It's getting to me. But, yeah, so Blackstar, very important in terms of opening my eyes to that. And it also, one other thing that I give it credit for, was it made me confront the idea of legacy and analyzing an artist's career kind of in totality, start to finish. There's not much explanation that really needs to be, or not much elaboration that really needs to be given on that, because everyone knows when talking about Blackstar, that it is sort of a legacy defining album, a legacy summarizing album, if you will. And but I think this really allowed me to kind of think in those terms, like front to back, evaluating an artist's career. And yeah, 2016 had a lot of major musical deaths. So there's a couple of other ones that I could have put on here. Like, I mean, Prince, obviously. Though I don't think I had an album that I really connected to Prince dying. It was just one of those things that was like a huge cultural moment, especially because I live in Minnesota, so like you could not get away from talking about it. And then Leonard Cohen is the other one that comes to mind for me in the You Want It Darker album. So a lot of darkness that year, for a variety of reasons. So yeah, Blackstar, very important in just kind of shaping how I approach understanding music and evaluating music. And yeah, just opening my mind to tons of other genres, tons of other ideas, all sorts of stuff. So major credit to Blackstar. My next album sort of covers the same idea of helping me open my mind to experimentation, but this one admittedly is a lot more of a personal connection too. I am talking about Bon Iver's 22 a Million, also from 2016. 22 a Million is a hard one to talk about. There's a lot going on there, and it's one of those albums where initial reaction I think was mixed because people didn't know what to make of it. I'm not going to say that 22 a Million was a huge left turn for Bon Iver in his career. I think you could see the signs of it coming in the self-titled album. But it is so abrasive in so many ways that I still think people were they were not prepared for how much Justin Vernon was going to throw at you. So, this is perhaps my favorite album of all time. Now, it wasn't always, but there's a lot of things that work in its favor. The timing of it, this came out in September of 2016, if I remember correctly. So it came out right as I was starting college. I actually remember, I have a distinct memory of one of the people who would become one of my best friends playing one of the songs from this album. I think it was Stratford Apartments. And yeah, so the timing of it and, me listening to it around that time, I associated with those memories. And that's a very valuable thing, obviously, when we're talking about music. Again, talked about the experimental nature of it. This thing is all over the place. There's a lot of kind of sonic manipulations. A lot of people's criticisms with it, criticisms of this album are because it is distorted and that the production sounds like shit. When in fact it's all intentional. Now, that doesn't mean you have to enjoy it, obviously, but there's a lot of intentional manipulation going on there. Like, I think in Stratford Apartments, for instance, where they recorded it to a cassette tape, and then they messed around with the cassette loops, like putting a pencil in and just kind of jerking it around all over the place, and that's why the vocals kind of cut in and out and sound distorted and stuff. So, it's interesting, the creative process. So again, just kind of reading about that was like, oh, that's cool that they, were messing around with that stuff. Kind of, again, gives you an insight into the creative process of everything. And then the themes it discusses. Vernon wrote this album. It's kind of For Emma Part 2 for him, in that he wrote it kind of in isolation. I think, again, after a pretty bad breakup. And in addition to everything else, he was also drinking very heavily, to the point of, I don't remember if he ended up going into treatment after this. Not sure that he did. But Yeah, offhand, I don't remember. But he was battling a severe drinking problem at this point. And yeah, it's because of that, it's a very despondent album. It's an album that goes around just kind of in all different directions. It doesn't know what it wants to do, really. It doesn't know what it wants to be. It doesn't know if it wants to be anything. I mean, that opening line in the title track, "It might be over soon." Um, it's hard to tell if that's just an observation or if that's like a desire, you know. And yeah, so there's a lot. And I mean, you know, it's not the time and place, but I mean, I've gone through my own shit, you know, as most people have. Um, my own kind of battles with depression and suicidality. And this album was cathartic because I think it really represented like it validated my struggles by saying, yeah, it's okay that you don't know exactly what direction you want your life to go in. It's okay that everything sounds messy. This is a messy fucking album. And yeah, so there's a whole lot of artists and albums and songs that I could mention when talking about like really strong personal emotional connections. A lot of indie folk artists like Sufjan Stevens, Carrie and Lowell is a big one. Iron and Wine's The Shepherd's Dog is another big album. Stuff like that. But this one I think is the one that has resounded to me the most. And to end this part of the discussion on a positive note, the song Eight Circle, which is probably top 5 song for me of all time, that song is sort of the resolution of everything. And to me, it's kind of it's the transition into the last part of the album where there's actually a little bit of a sense of optimism. You know, Justin's vocals are all like disguised in kind of the first 2/3, 3/4 of the album. They're distorted, they're pitched up and down. You know, he's trying to kind of mask himself. And then all of a sudden, in Eighth Circle, he's just singing. And it's just his normal voice. And that's kind of, I cling on to that because that's kind of the first sign that, hey, you know, we might be able to make it out of this. We might be okay. So yeah, big tangent there, but yeah, 22 a Million, very strong influence for me overall. So that's my 9th choice. All right, we're winding down. Next up is going to be Tori Amos's Little Earthquakes from 1992. Little Earthquakes came into my life around 2019 or so. Was around the first time I heard it, and specifically the song Winter, which is a stunningly emotional song. You want to talk about songs that get me emotional, I think that one is near the top of the list. But this whole album really is, there's this combination of grace and force that mix together amazingly on this whole thing. And that's not even taking into account just the incredible piano playing, the great singing, and the masterful songwriting that go into all of this. This is an album that is very, I mean, it is feminine. It is a strong, feminist statement. And I mean, obviously I'm not, I won't pretend like I hadn't heard much from female artists before that, but I don't think I'd heard an album to that point that was that sort of brash and uncompromising, I guess, in what it stands for. And it's not, and the thing is, like, it's also not like a hashtag girl power type of album either. That's not the point. It's very real. It's Tori telling stories about her own life, about her experience being a woman, about sex, about rape in the case of Me and a Gun. Her relationship with her individual parents, her father in Winter and her mother in Mother, things like that. There's just a whole bunch of issues that she talks about. And I am, yeah, just, it blows me. The frankness of it, the honesty of it, the willingness that she has to cut open that vein, I think that is all just, it's spectacular. And it's spectacularly well done. Like, I have a soft spot for piano playing, for piano oriented music. I love Elton John, for instance. So, yeah. Tori, yeah. Big deal. Yeah, this was a big one for me. So, had to pick it. Had to pick it. And again, the timing of it. There was some timing with stuff that I had going on in my personal life where this was very important and influential to me as well. So, Little Earthquakes is my 10th choice. All right, my 11th choice is going to be the classic Brazilian album by Milton Nascimento and Lou Borges, Clube de Esquina from 1972. So I believe I looked up the pronunciation of these, so I'm hoping I'm accurate in that. This is a much more recent discovery for me. I heard this for the first time in a car trip with a friend of mine from out of state who was visiting. And it's an album that, I've known of for years and years. I had not made the time to listen to it. And this album, I think, more than anything, kind of represents the areas that I still want to grow in and still need to grow in if I'm going to make this project anything close to competent. Albums that are either not Western or are not written in English are definitely a weak spot for me, which is interesting because historically speaking, I've never been a someone who thinks lyrics are of the utmost importance, at least not all the time. But yeah, it's been a barrier for me that I have not been able to successfully break down. But listening to this album was a big one. A big one because it's a fantastic album, first and foremost. Nascimento is a Brazilian legend, as well he should be, and I think it's amazing that he's still with us and is still performing today. And so is Lou Borges, actually. It's just that he didn't do as much after this, but Nascimento is, like, he has an incredible body of work. But yeah, all of these songs are just delicious, I guess, is the maybe cringy way that I'm describing it. But they're really beautiful melodies. Sonically, it's a stunning album. It sounds like really, really good. And then when you dig into the lyrics, finding decent translations of it, or translating it yourself if that's the direction you want to go down, pretty powerful stuff. A lot of interesting social commentary. And now, granted, that social commentary will require a knowledge of Brazilian history, Brazilian politics, and other social things that I don't possess currently, which is why I'm trying to educate myself on other things. That's why I reviewed and read that book on Simone Bolivar, for instance. Trying to get my feet wet in this sort of area and grow in that. And so this is it's a fantastic album, and it's kind of been my gateway into Brazilian music, and then just other music in foreign languages, whether it's Portuguese or Spanish, French, what have you. It's a terrific album, and this is the growth area that I'm planning on continuing to work on throughout this project because, ultimately at the end of the day, if I didn't have any growth areas, I wouldn't be doing this project in the first place. This is an educational opportunity for me, and it's one that I don't intend to waste. So this is me admitting my blind spot and pledging to continue to work on it over time. So, but yeah, this was a great experience. Thank you to said friend for introducing me to that album. I won't name him since he may not want to be named, but yeah, terrific album. Go check it out. No best album of the 1970s list can be complete without discussing this record. So yeah, give it a listen, 100%. All right, and then last of all, we're going to end it on another kind of change in perspective that I have had. This one, not a growth area anymore because my perspective did change, but rather a proof of, I don't know, kind of what happens when you allow yourself to be open-minded and what has been the most rewarding thing of my musical journey so far. The album in particular is going to be Taylor Swift's Evermore from 2020. So the Taylor Swift story is a long one. But basically, Taylor Swift I roped into other kind of contemporary pop acts back in the day where I was dismissive of the music. I would hear the stuff from like Red specifically, like We Were Never Ever Getting Back Together, and I Knew You Were Trouble on the radio, and I didn't like it at the time. And while I ended up seeing the light for several, like a bunch of like pop stars, like, Gaga, for instance, Taylor Swift was one who I always still kind of wrote off. I remember when Look What You Made Me Do came out, Mike the Snare did a good kind of video on that, talking about his own reaction to that song and to the whole Reputation album cycle. I was very dismissive of it. I don't think I listened to Reputation in its entirety at the time, but I was very dismissive of that song. And it's still far from my favorite Taylor Swift song, but, I really laid into it at the time. Fast forward to 2020, early 2020, and my friend and roommate convinced me to watch the Miss Americana documentary on Netflix. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give it a go. I knew she was a Taylor Swift fan, and I'm like, I should probably be, try to have a more fair perspective on her as a person and as a musician. I really liked the Miss Americana documentary. I think she comes off really well and really personable in it. And after watching it, I was inspired to check out her discography. Specifically Lover, because that's the album that they focus on in that documentary. So I think I listened to that, and then I listened to her other stuff chronologically. And I was floored. I was floored at how much I liked it. And so my opinions, they really did change on at the snap of a finger, right? Like that. 2020 was a very good year to get into Taylor Swift because of everything that happened. This was probably in February, March, April 2020. July 2020, obviously she comes out with Folklore, which I loved first listen. I listened to it the night it came out. Adored it. And then Evermore came out after that. Now, the reason I put Evermore and not Folklore is because Evermore is my favorite album of hers now, and it's to the point where it's a top 10 album for me of all time, at least right now. So in a way, it represents that kind of apex of how my opinions switched. I went from Taylor Swift being probably one of my least favorite pop stars to having an album of hers rank that highly for me. Why Evermore and not the other ones? Evermore, I think, is her strongest album from a songwriting standpoint. She combines character studies, utilizing these fictional scenarios a la, Bob Dylan, not necessarily fictional always, but, things that aren't personal to her. Combining these studies with self-reflection. I mean, there are lyrics that are personal to her on there, even if I think people tend to view it as an album where she's actually not talking about herself. She obviously is, and I think there's double meanings to some of the lyrics in there, where they could apply to herself. So yeah, I think it's just she's never been a stronger songwriter, I think, than she is on this album. And it's all sharp, it's all great. If you were to ask me to point out like a particular example, I'd actually pick out one of the bonus tracks, Right Where You Left Me. I think that's that's a ridiculously fantastic song. But yeah, it's a stunning album, and it's one of those things where, I mean, now I'm banging the drum saying, why aren't we talking about Taylor Swift as one of the greatest songwriters to have walked the planet? She has the melodic ability of a McCartney or someone like that. She has the, again, not always. I'm not saying every lyric she writes is necessarily quote unquote poetry, because it doesn't need to be. But, I mean, she absolutely has plenty of songs that I would put up against a lot of like what Dylan wrote, quite frankly. She is someone who, I mean, she's at the top of her game now, and everyone knows it, and everyone knows she's the biggest thing in the business. And I think we need to acknowledge her in her time. Like, I think as people who are more kind of historically focused, we should endeavor to recognize her accomplishments for what they are in the moment. Like, she is one of the greatest to ever do it. Let's talk about that. Let's be honest about that, and let's interrogate that. Let's say why. And yeah, I think I'm very big on this is kind of going back to the David Bowie thing, but I'm very big on giving people credit while they're still with us, while they're still alive. And I mean, while they're still at their best. Like, I don't think you need to be 70, 80 fucking years old to receive credit, to receive honors, things like that. Like, let's give her the honors. She is the biggest thing. She is doing incredible things that very few other singers, songwriters, musicians, artists, etc. do. Let's give her that credit in the moment. So, yeah. So I feel very passionately about that side of things. And again, Evermore represents that. Taylor Swift represents that. And I think seeing kind of my change of opinion with her and how rewarding that change was, because I don't like to hate music. I really don't. I know there are people who do, and to them I say, I don't understand how you can enjoy being miserable, but fair enough. Yeah, just seeing how rewarding that change was. I mean, it gives more meaning, more emphasis about why I'm doing what I'm doing. So that is that. That was a very long video. I knew it was going to go long. I wasn't expecting it to go, close to an hour, but them's the breaks. So, yeah, these are all albums, musical works, songs, etc. that have kind of, in their own ways, shaped the project that I am embarking on, that I hope that you will be a part of. And, yeah, it's an incredible foundation, and I'm just excited to see what other works I discover. Excited to see maybe what other things I can help lead other people to. And, and again, there's so many works and artists that I didn't even mention. Elton John, Elliott Smith, a couple of people who were remarkably influential to me, and I just couldn't find a spot on the list. Kate Bush, another one. Kendrick Lamar, another one. I couldn't, there wasn't room for them on this list, so they don't make it, but they're there in spirit, as are so many other artists, as are so many other albums, songs, other musical works. And we move forward. And I hope that you move forward with me. If you've watched this whole video, I'm impressed. I am beyond impressed that you were able to do that, and I am beyond grateful. So, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got more reviews coming out in the near future here. And yeah, until next time, I'm Alex, and you have been watching Music Hub. Take care now.